The old pickup's dashboard clock read 1:37 p.m. when we turned onto the unmarked dirt path. Gravel crunched beneath the tires of Jax's borrowed truck as dust billowed behind us. I gripped the edge of my seat, trying to ignore the churning in my stomach. "You feeling all right, Ethan?" Jax glanced over at me, his brown eyes bright with the familiar spark of adventure that had always drawn me to him, the same spark that now filled me with a cold dread. "I'm fine," I lied, the words tasting like ash. "Just a little car sick." I wasn't fine. I hadn't been fine since that nightmare last night. The memory of it clung to me like a shroud. The sensation of something vast and dark rising from unseen depths, the pressure of unseen eyes tracking me from the shadows, the crushing weight of a silent, alien presence. "Almost there," Jax announced, his voice cutting through my thoughts. He reached over and squeezed my knee. "This is going to be epic. The ArcLight Research Complex, completely untouched since the late 60s, maybe even the 70s. From the back seat, Finn leaned forward between us. "Better watch out for the specters of failed science," he said in a mock spooky voice, his usual grin firmly in place. "Legend says the scientists here went mad trying to perfect their creations. Still lurking, looking for new test subjects." "Shut up, Finn," Chloe said, elbowing him from her seat behind Jax. "What? I'm just setting the mood," Finn protested, a laugh bubbling in his throat. "Ignore him, Ethan," Liam said quietly from the middle seat. "The place has been abandoned for over 50 years, nothing there but dust and rust, and probably some very outdated equipment." I nodded, but couldn't shake the growing feeling that we were making a terrible mistake. This unease had been a subtle undercurrent for months as we planned this expedition. At first, I'd shared everyone's enthusiasm. Urban exploration had been our shared passion since Jax introduced me to it shortly after we met in college. We'd explored decaying factories, an old sanitarium, even a defunct amusement park. But something about this ArcLight complex felt different. More forbidden. The truck hit a pothole and I jolted forward, my seat belt digging into my shoulder. "Sorry," Jax said, slowing down slightly. "Road's worse than I expected." "That's because it's not a road," Chloe observed. "More like a trail that time forgot." Through the windshield, I could see ancient pines crowding in on both sides of the narrow path. We were far from anything resembling civilization now. My phone had lost signal about 20 minutes ago, a fact I'd noticed with increasing panic. "Remember that old missile silo in the desert?" Jax said, clearly trying to distract me. "The one with all the rusted launch controls. This place is supposed to be 10 times cooler." "Yeah, and no angry farmers to chase us out," Finn added, his grin infectious. I forced a smile. Jax knew me too well. He'd been noticing my discomfort throughout the entire 2-hour drive from the city. At first, he'd tried engaging me in conversation about our previous explorations, then about my photography plans for this trip, and finally, he'd just turned up the radio, letting classic rock fill the awkward silence. "You've been quiet all morning," Liam noted, leaning forward. "Everything okay?" I shrugged. "Just tired, didn't sleep well." "Nightmares again?" Chloe asked. She was the only one I'd told about my recurring dreams of silent, dark depths and unseen observers. "Something like that," I admitted, not wanting to get into the details with everyone listening. Finn made a ghostly woo sound. "The spirits are trying to warn you, man." "Shut up, Finn," Chloe snapped at him. "Relax, everyone," Jax said. "It's just nerves. Ethan always gets a little anxious before a new exploration. Remember how he was before we went into the Blackwood Sanitarium?" I remembered, but this was different. The sanitarium had given me pause because of its sordid history of patient mistreatment. This was a deep, visceral dread that I couldn't shake off. "We don't have to do this," Jax said quietly, just to me. "We can turn around right now if you want." 4 pairs of eyes were suddenly on me. Jax looked concerned, but also subtly disappointed. Finn rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed at the thought of turning back after coming this far. Liam's expression was neutral, waiting for my decision. Chloe gave me a small, supportive smile. The words formed in my throat. Yes, let's go back, but I couldn't bring myself to say them. I didn't want to ruin everyone's adventure. I didn't want to be the weak one. Most of all, I didn't want to disappoint Jax. "No, I'm fine," I said, forcing conviction into my voice. "Really, let's keep going." Jax's face lit up with relief and excitement. "That's my guy." The truck rounded a final bend in the road, and suddenly the trees cleared to reveal our destination. The ArcLight Research Complex stood before us, a massive concrete structure, gray and intimidating against the afternoon sky. Broken windows, more like gaping black holes, dotted the facade. Thick vines, like skeletal hands, crawled up the walls, nature slowly reclaiming what humans had abandoned. "We're here," Jax announced, bringing the truck to a stop. He looked over at me, eyes shining with adventure and affection. Ready to explore? The question hung in the air as I stared at the building. Every instinct screamed at me to make an excuse, to convince them all to leave. Instead, I nodded, unable to find my voice. Jax leaned over and clapped me on the shoulder before turning to the others. "All right, gear up, everyone. Let's see what secrets this place is hiding." As everyone began gathering their backpacks and equipment, I remained frozen in my seat, staring at the decaying facade of the complex. Something was profoundly wrong about this place. I could feel it, a cold prickle on the back of my neck. But I said nothing. "This place is even better than I expected," Jax said, pulling out his camera and snapping a few shots of the exterior. The building stood tall before us, much larger and more imposing than it had appeared from a distance. Concrete walls, stained with decades of grime and crawling vines, stretched upward. Windows gaped open, their glass long shattered, like empty eye sockets. "Looks like it's been abandoned since the Stone Age," Finn said, already walking toward the rusted chain-link fence that surrounded the property. "But there's some cool stuff inside." I hung back, clutching my backpack straps until my knuckles whitened. This place gave me a bad feeling, not just abandoned but unwelcoming. The distant, faint sound of something like slow, deliberate dripping, somewhere deep within the facility, made my skin crawl. It was like the rhythm of my nightmare. "You coming, Ethan?" Jax called back, pausing when he noticed I wasn't following. "Maybe we should just take some exterior photos," I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. "This place looks really unstable." Chloe gave me a sympathetic look. "Ethan's right, that building doesn't look up to code." "That's the whole point," Finn said, rolling his eyes. He'd reached the fence and was inspecting it. "Hey, look. Someone's already cut through here." The chain link had been sliced open, creating a gap just large enough for a person to slip through. Finn ducked through without hesitation. Liam adjusted his glasses. Probably local teens looking for a place to drink, or maybe even some other explorers. "Guys, I really don't think this is a good idea," I said, more forcefully this time. "What if there are squatters inside? Or worse, the structure itself could be compromised." Jax walked back and took my hand. "Ethan, we've been planning this for weeks. The place has been abandoned for decades. If anyone was using it, we'd see signs. Fresh garbage, lights at night, something." I knew I was losing the argument. Everyone was looking at me again, waiting for me to cave like I always did. 5 minutes, I said finally. "We go in, take some quick photos, and leave before it gets dark." Jax grinned and squeezed my hand. "That's the spirit." One by one, we slipped through the fence opening. I went last, catching my jacket on a jagged piece of metal. I tugged it free, the sound a faint rip. The grounds surrounding the facility were overgrown with weeds and small trees that had forced their way through cracks in the concrete walkways. As we approached the main entrance, Finn tried the door handle. Surprisingly, it turned, the metal screeching from years of disuse. The heavy door swung open, revealing utter darkness beyond. "Ladies first," Finn said with a mock bow. "Very funny," Chloe replied, pushing past him. Jax switched on his powerful LED flashlight, though enough sunlight filtered through the broken windows that we could still see without it. The entrance hall was littered with debris, fallen ceiling tiles, broken glass, and papers yellowed with age. The moment I stepped inside, a wave of nausea washed over me. The air was thick, musty, with a strong, cloying metallic smell, like old blood and rust mixed with something else, something I couldn't quite place, but it scraped at the back of my throat. I covered my nose with my sleeve. "God, what is that smell?" I asked. "Probably just rust and standing water," Liam said, though he looked uncomfortable too. "These old pipes have been degrading for decades, and the lack of airflow means everything just lingers." Jax was already moving deeper into the building, his flashlight beam dancing across peeling paint and water-stained walls. "Check out these control panels," he called from an adjoining room. We followed him into what must have been a main control room. Massive panels lined the walls, covered in dials, switches, and gauges now frozen in time. The glass faces of the instruments were cracked or missing altogether. "This is incredible," Liam said, examining the panels with genuine interest. "Some of this technology seems remarkably advanced for the supposed era. Look at these circuit designs, the alloy composition of some of these components. It's not standard industrial stuff for the 1960s. Jax began snapping photos while Finn rummaged through drawers, pocketing small knobs and switches as souvenirs. Don't take too much, I warned. That's technically stealing, Finn snorted. From who? The ghost of failed experiments past. He punched Jax's arm playfully, but no one laughed. I wandered toward a large, shattered window that overlooked what appeared to be a processing room below. Large cylindrical tanks made of dark, unidentifiable metal stood in rows, connected by a complex network of pipes. Something about their arrangement seemed oddly deliberate, almost like, "Hey guys," Chloe called from another doorway. I found what looks like an office with a bunch of old files. Everyone except me hurried to see Chloe's discovery. I lingered by the window, staring at those tanks. They didn't look like they were designed just for water processing. They seemed more like containment units. Containment for what? I finally pulled myself away and joined the others in what had indeed been an administrative office. Filing cabinets stood with drawers partially open, papers spilling onto the floor. Liam was carefully examining documents while Chloe photographed some pinned to a bulletin board. A lot of these files have military stamps on them, Liam noted, showing us a yellow document with a faded red classified stamp across the top, and dates stretching well into the late 70s and early 80s. I told you this place was more than just a water plant, Jack said excitedly. Why would a simple research facility have classified documents from the Cold War? The sunlight filtering through the broken windows had begun to dim as afternoon gave way to evening. We should head back soon, I said, glancing at my watch. It's getting late. We've barely seen anything yet, Finn protested, switching on his own flashlight as the room darkened. Jax turned his light on too. Just a little longer, Ethan. We might not get another chance to come back here. I wanted to argue but knew it would be pointless. Instead, I switched on my own flashlight and followed as they moved deeper into the building. We explored a series of winding corridors, opening doors to find storage rooms, employee bathrooms with rusted fixtures, and what might have been a break room with toppled tables and chairs. The metallic smell grew stronger in some areas, making me breathe through my mouth to avoid gagging. This place just keeps going, Chloe said, her voice bouncing off the walls of the empty hallway. There must be a lower level, Jack said, shining his light on a faded sign that read, "Restricted area, authorized personnel only, biohazard." My stomach sank. I knew what would happen next. We followed the signs to a heavy metal door that had been left partially open, perhaps pried open by previous visitors or simply succumbed to gravity. Jax pushed it with his shoulder, and it groaned open to reveal a stairwell leading down into absolute blackness. "Jackpot," Finn whispered, already starting down the stairs. The stairwell led to another corridor, this one lined with massive, intricate pipes that ran along the ceiling. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, each drop sounding unnaturally loud in the profound silence. "Look at this," Finn called from up ahead. We caught up to find him standing at the edge of a large, circular opening in the concrete floor, almost like a well. A metal ladder, thick with rust, descended into utter darkness below. Finn aimed his powerful flashlight down, but the beam couldn't penetrate far enough to see the bottom. "There's a whole other level down there." "A big one? No way," I said immediately, taking a step back. "That's where we draw the line. That looks incredibly unstable." "Are you kidding? This is what we came for," Finn said, already putting his foot on the first rung of the ladder. "Finn, stop," I said, grabbing his arm. "We don't know if that ladder is stable. The whole floor could collapse, or it could be flooded down there, or something else entirely." Jax shone his light on the ladder. "It looks solid to me. Rusty but still attached. With Ethan on this one," Chloe said, crossing her arms. "Going down there seems unnecessarily risky. We've found plenty of interesting things up here. Come on, we've come all this way." Finn argued, "What's the point of urban exploring if we don't actually explore?" Liam looked between us, then at the ladder. He adjusted his glasses. "Maybe just a quick look. We don't have to go far." Just a peek. I couldn't believe Liam was siding with them. He was usually the voice of reason. "It's 3 against 2, Finn said with a smirk. "It's not a vote," I said, my voice rising. "This is dangerous. That hole could lead anywhere. There could be toxic chemicals down there, or the air might not be breathable. We read the biohazard sign, remember?" Jax put his hand on my shoulder. "Ethan, we'll be careful. Just a quick look down there, then we'll head back. I promise we'll use our air quality sensors." He gestured to the small device clipped to his belt. I looked at him, his face half illuminated by the flashlight beam. I wanted to stand my ground, to refuse, and make them all leave with me. But I also didn't want to be alone up here while they went down. I knew how stubborn Jax could be once he set his mind to something. And I couldn't bear the thought of him going down alone or with just Finn. "Fine," I said finally, the word a struggle. But at the first sign of trouble, we turned back immediately. "No arguments," Chloe looked at me in surprise. "You're actually going down there?" I took a deep breath. "I'm not letting them go alone." She hesitated, then shook her head. "I'll stay up here and keep watch. Someone should stay where there's a chance of cell reception in case, in case something goes wrong." She didn't need to say more. Liam nodded. "If we're not back in 20 minutes, go get help." "Raise the alarm." 20 minutes, Chloe agreed, checking her watch. "Not a minute longer." Finn was already halfway down the ladder, his flashlight clenched between his teeth. Jax went next, then Liam, leaving me standing at the edge of the hole with Chloe. "You don't have to go," she said quietly. I stared down at the 3 beams of light swinging in the darkness below. "Yes, I do." Chloe squeezed my arm. "Be careful, Ethan." I nodded, turned my flashlight to its brightest setting, and began the descent into darkness. Each metal rung was cold beneath my fingers, slick with the pervasive dampness. The metallic smell grew stronger as I climbed down, and the sound of dripping water, amplified by the enclosed space, bounced around me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were descending into something we weren't meant to find, something that had been deliberately buried and forgotten. The heavy door above, left ajar, seemed to mock my unease, inviting us deeper into the complex. The bottom of the ladder met cold concrete beneath my shoes. I stepped aside to make room for the others, my flashlight beam cutting through the profound darkness to reveal walls coated with decades of grime, glistening in places with what looked like mineral deposits or something far more unpleasant. The air down here was different, colder, more oppressive, with a dampness that seemed to cling to my skin and an unmistakable, almost chemical metallic taste that made my stomach turn. "We made it," Jax whispered, but the vast emptiness of the space swallowed his voice and returned it from multiple directions. A faint, unnerving echo. Finn shined his light around the walls. "Man, this place is huge." He wasn't wrong. We stood at the entrance of a corridor that split into 3 separate, wide tunnels, each disappearing into an impenetrable blackness. Massive, intricate pipes ran along the ceiling and walls, some as thick as my torso, others no wider than my wrist. Most were rusted and flaking, but a few shone dimly under our flashlights, suggesting materials that had somehow resisted decades of corrosion, perhaps specialized alloys. 20 minutes, I reminded them quietly, my voice sounding thin and small in the cavernous space. "Chloe's waiting," Jax nodded, already moving toward the central tunnel. "This way looks promising. It seems to be the main access." I followed close behind him, not wanting to be left alone even for a second. Liam trailed after us, his footsteps bouncing in perfect rhythm with mine. The sound of our breathing, our movements, and the crunch of debris underfoot, everything seemed unnaturally loud in this subterranean expanse, as if the silence itself was listening. Amplifying every disturbance, the tunnel opened into a large chamber filled with machinery I couldn't identify. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen in photographs of old industrial sites or even military bunkers. Jax whistled low, the sound reverberating eerily. "Look at this equipment," he said, approaching what appeared to be a control panel that spanned nearly an entire wall. Unlike the rusted remnants upstairs, many of these components were sealed behind thick, reinforced glass that had somehow remained intact, almost pristine. Dials, gauges, and switches, some with glowing, faintly luminescent indicators, lined the panels, their purposes a complete mystery to me. Liam adjusted his glasses, leaning in to examine the machinery with a fascinated intensity that momentarily pushed away his usual cautious demeanor. "This doesn't make sense. This technology, it's far too sophisticated for the 1960s, even the 70s. These circuit boards, the material composition of some of these processors, this isn't standard industrial equipment for any known purpose from that era. Not even military grade for the general public." "What do you mean?" I asked, staying near the entrance, ready to retreat at any moment. "These components," Liam gestured at a section of the panel. "Some of these designs weren't fully developed until the late 80s or even 90s. And these alloys, Ethan, they're unlike anything I've encountered. This isn't just for water treatment or even basic research. This is highly specialized, for something entirely different." Jax ran his fingers over one of the sealed panels, his face alight with newfound excitement. "I told you this place wasn't what it seemed. The government claimed it was just for some experimental atmospheric research, but they were doing something else here. Something they wanted to keep deeply, profoundly secret. The chill that ran through me had nothing to do with the temperature. I swept my flashlight across the room, stopping at a section of wall near another exit. What are those markings? We all aimed our lights at the wall. Strange, intricate symbols had been etched into the concrete, not graffiti or standard maintenance notations, but deliberate patterns of lines and curves that formed no letters or numbers I recognized. They looked ancient yet unsettlingly precise. Some appeared to be recursive, others almost like biological diagrams, but stylized. Some kind of code, maybe, Liam suggested, stepping closer to examine them, tracing a finger along one of the grooves. Or a very elaborate diagram, or warning signs, I murmured, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Finn snorted. Yeah, probably says beware of the thing that eats scientists. He punched Jax's arm playfully, but the joke fell flat. No one laughed. The atmosphere was too heavy, too strange for levity. Let's keep moving, Jax said, heading toward the exit nearest the marked wall. We still have plenty of time before we need to head back up, and I want to see what else they were hiding. The next corridor was narrower, forcing us to walk single file. The omnipresent sound of dripping water, somewhere ahead, intensified, each drop amplified by the enclosed space, echoing like a slow, deliberate drumbeat. My flashlight beam caught something moving at the very edge of its reach, probably just water running down the wall or shadows from a shifting light, but it made me jump all the same. You okay? Jax asked, looking back at me, his voice a low concern. Fine, I lied, quickening my pace to stay closer to him, the primal urge to huddle with the group overriding my growing fear. The corridor eventually opened into the largest room yet. It was a huge, circular space, cavernous and cold, filled with enormous, dark metal tanks arranged in a precise, almost ritualistic circular pattern. Each tank stood at least 15 feet tall, connected to its neighbors by a complex network of pipes, valves, and what looked like thick, reinforced cables. In the absolute center of the circle was a depression in the floor, similar to a shallow, murky pit filled with a viscous, inky black liquid. Our flashlights barely disturbed its surface. What is this place? I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. Jax moved toward the nearest tank, running his hand along its curved, cold surface. These don't look like standard water treatment tanks, he murmured, his voice hushed with awe. They're more like containment units. Containment for what? Liam asked, voicing the question I was too afraid to form. He looked genuinely unnerved now, his scientific curiosity warring with a growing sense of dread. Finn had wandered to the far side of the room, where his flashlight illuminated what appeared to be another ladder, this one ascending into a dark, narrow shaft high above. Hey guys, there's another level up here, he called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. An overwhelming sense of wrongness hit me. The air felt electric, buzzing with an unseen energy. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was observing us from the shadows, tracking our movements with cold, calculating interest. The silence was broken only by the faint, rhythmic pulse of an unseen, colossal heartbeat, or perhaps just my own terrified pulse echoing in my ears. We need to go back, I said, louder than I intended, my voice cracking slightly. Right now, Jax turned to me, his expression showing both concern and a flicker of disappointment. Ethan, we've barely started exploring. This is the discovery of a lifetime. We're in some kind of secret underground lab, man. Imagine the photos, the story. Something isn't right here, I insisted, backing toward the entrance we'd come through, my heart hammering against my ribs. Can't you feel it? This place, it's not just abandoned, it's wrong. Terribly, fundamentally wrong. Finn hopped down from the platform where he'd found the ladder. Come on, Ethan, don't ruin this for everyone. We might never get another chance to explore somewhere this cool. Think of the bragging rights. I looked to Liam, hoping for support, but he hesitated, his gaze fixed on the dark, central pool. Maybe we should just take a quick look at what's up that ladder, he suggested, looking between me and Jax. Then we can head back. We still have about 10 minutes before Chloe will start to worry. I don't want to go up there, I said, hating how weak my voice sounded. I want to leave now. Every fiber of my being is screaming at me to run. Jax approached me, taking my hands in his. His grip was warm and reassuring, a stark contrast to the cold dread that seeped into my bones. 5 more minutes, Ethan. That's all, just a quick look up that ladder, and if there's nothing interesting, we'll go back. I promise. We'll be extra careful, I swear. I wanted to stand firm, to demand we leave this place and never return. but 3 pairs of eyes were on me, waiting for me to give in like I always did. Their expectations, their shared thrill of discovery, felt heavier than the dread in my stomach, heavier than the oppressive silence. "Fine," I said reluctantly. 5 minutes, not a second more, and we stay together, all of us." Finn grinned triumphantly. "That's the spirit, adventure awaits." He bounded back to the ladder, Jax following close behind. I couldn't move. My feet felt cemented to the concrete floor, refusing to go toward what every instinct told me was danger. Liam lingered beside me. "We don't have to go if you're really scared," he said quietly. "I can tell them to go ahead while we wait here. Chloe and I could come back for you." The thought of separating, of the group splitting up in this maze of tunnels, seemed even more dangerous, a cardinal sin in urban exploration. "No," I said finally. "We stay together, all of us." With each hesitant step toward the ladder, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, more acute. I cast a final look back at the murky pool in the center of the room. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw the surface ripple, as if something beneath had moved in response to our presence, a subtle shift in the oily blackness. Just my imagination, I told myself, tearing my gaze away. Finn was already several rungs up, the beam of his flashlight bobbing with each movement, sending grotesque shadows dancing across the cavernous walls. Jax followed close behind, his excitement tangible even in the dim, oppressive light. I remained at the bottom, my feet still reluctant, my body stiff with a primal reluctance. "Come on, Ethan," Jax called down, his voice bouncing strangely in the cavernous room. "It's sturdy enough." I placed my foot on the first rung, testing it with my weight. The metal creaked under the strain of time and rust, but held firm. With each step upward, the feeling of dread intensified, as though I was climbing towards something terrible rather than away from it. Liam climbed behind me, his breathing matching the rhythm of our ascent, a strained, almost desperate sound. "Almost there," Finn announced from above, his voice muffled by the opening the ladder led to a narrow opening in the ceiling, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Finn pulled himself through first, then reached down to help Jax up. When my turn came, I hesitated, looking back down at the circular arrangement of tanks below us. From this height their patterns seemed even more deliberate, almost ritualistic, like a massive, unsettling clock. Jax's hand appeared in the opening above me. "I've got you," he said, his voice reassuring. I took his hand and let him pull me up into another corridor, this one narrower and darker than those below. Liam emerged a moment later, adjusting his glasses as he stood. "How much time do we have left?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jax checked his watch, the small light illuminating his anxious face. 8 minutes before we need to head back to Chloe." The corridor stretched before us, lined with what appeared to be sealed chambers. Each had a heavy metal door with a small, reinforced window at eye level, opaque with grime. Finn was already moving ahead, shining his light through the first window. "Guys, you need to see this," he called back, his voice edged with a strange mix of excitement and unease. We joined him at the door. I peered through the cloudy glass, my flashlight illuminating what appeared to be laboratory equipment, much more modern and sophisticated than anything we'd seen in the upper levels. Stainless steel tables, gleaming even in the dim light, equipment covered in plastic sheets, and walls lined with cabinets filled with glassware and strange instruments. It looked like a hospital operating room, but for something alien. "This doesn't look like water treatment," Jax murmured, pressing his face closer to the glass. "Because it isn't," Liam replied, his voice uncharacteristically grim. "I think we're in some kind of highly classified biological research facility. These aren't just labs, they look like isolation chambers." We moved to the next door, then the next, finding similar setups in each chamber. Some contained equipment I couldn't identify, strange, multi-jointed arms or elaborate containment systems, while others held rows of empty, smaller tanks, resembling the massive ones in the room below, but clearly designed for individual specimens. What were they studying down here? I asked, my question directed at no one in particular. No one answered. The implications hung heavy in the air, a chilling silence. We continued down the corridor, our flashlight beams cutting through decades of undisturbed darkness. The sealed chambers eventually gave way to a single, larger door at the very end of the corridor. Unlike the others, this one stood partially open, as if someone had left in a hurry or had been forced to leave. Finn pushed it wider with his shoulder, the hinges groaning in protest, a sound that grated on my nerves. "Let's check it out," he said, his bravado wavering slightly. The room beyond was larger than the chambers we'd passed, even larger than the main control room upstairs. Our flashlights revealed more scientific equipment. Gleaming metal tables, banks of monitoring devices, and complex computer consoles, all dark and silent. But what dominated the space, what drew our eyes with a terrible magnetic pull, was a circular pool in the absolute center of the floor, about 15 feet across. The liquid within was so dark, so utterly devoid of light, that our flashlight beams didn't reflect off it. They simply vanished into its inky depths. "Is that water?" Liam asked, approaching the edge cautiously, his voice a strained whisper. I stayed back, unable to shake the feeling that we shouldn't be here, that we were intruding on something best left forgotten, something truly ancient and terrible. The air felt different in this room, thick and heavy, full of a strange, almost electric energy, like static electricity before a storm. And the acoustics were unnerving. When Jax whispered to Finn across the room, his voice carried as clearly as if he'd spoken directly into my ear. "This is weird," I said, my own voice sounding unnaturally loud, distorted, as if coming from inside my own skull. "Can you guys hear that?" "Hear what?" Jax asked, turning toward me, his brow furrowed. "The acoustics. Everything sounds wrong, like it's amplifying certain frequencies." Finn clapped his hands once sharply. The sound was deafeningly clear, even though the room was enormous. Then he snapped his fingers near the edge of the pool, and the sound seemed to ripple outward, bouncing off the walls in a way that defied the laws of physics, creating a chorus of phantom clicks and pops. "That's cool," he said, a nervous grin spreading across his face. He leaned closer to the pool, peering into its depths. "I wonder how deep it is." "Don't," I warned, my voice flat with dread. But Finn was already scanning the floor for something to throw. He picked up a chunk of concrete that had broken away from one of the walls. "Relax, Ethan. I'm just checking the depth." "We don't have time for this," I said, glancing at my watch, my anxiety spiking. "We need to head back. Chloe will be worried." "Just 1 second," Finn insisted, weighing the concrete chunk in his hand. "I want to see if this is just some decorative feature or if it's actually functional. Like a holding tank for something huge." Before I could object again, he tossed the piece of concrete into the center of the pool. It broke the surface with a distinctive, chilling plop that seemed to reverberate forever in the strange acoustics of the room. The splash settled, and for a moment there was complete, utter silence. An unnatural absence of sound that made my skin crawl, an emptiness that spoke of vast, waiting depths. Then, from somewhere deep within the pool, came a low, rumbling growl that I felt more than heard, vibrating through the floor beneath my feet, resonating in my very bones. "What was that?" Liam whispered, backing away from the edge, his face pale. The surface of the pool began to bubble and churn, not like boiling water, but as if something impossibly massive was moving beneath it, stirring its dark, viscous contents. The liquid sloshed violently against the edges, spilling onto the concrete floor, a thick black ooze. Then it emerged. A massive, pale shape rose from the water. First just a few inches, then more, revealing a serpentine body that seemed impossibly long for the size of the pool, coiling and uncoiling in the murky depths. It had no eyes that I could see, just smooth, milky white, glistening skin where eyes should have been, like some terrifying albino serpent. But its mouth, God, its mouth opened to reveal row after row of needle-like teeth, each the length of my finger, sharp as shards of obsidian, glinting wetly in our flashlight beams. A foul, metallic odor, far more potent than anything we'd smelled before, washed over us. We stood frozen in terror as the creature continued to rise from the water, its body undulating in a slow, hypnotic motion that was both graceful and horrifying. It towered over us, water streaming from its pale, slick flesh, creating dark, spreading puddles on the floor. Its head, a blunt, featureless mass, turned slowly, almost inquisitively, as if sensing our presence even though it had no eyes. An invisible wave of pure, unadulterated primal fear washed over me, rendering me utterly paralyzed. Liam broke first. He screamed, a high, panicked sound that shattered our paralysis in an instant. In that split second, we were all running toward the open door, our flashlight beams dancing wildly across the walls. A desperate, frantic scramble for escape. I reached the doorway first, Jax right behind me. I glanced back just in time to see the creature lunge with impossible, blinding speed. Its massive, eyeless head shot forward, a pale streak against the dark, oily surface of the pool. Andrew wasn't fast enough. The creature caught him from behind, its jaws clamping around his midsection. His scream cut short, choked off by the sheer force, as the creature lifted him off the ground, his body jerking violently, horrifyingly in its grip. Blood, so much blood sprayed across the floor and walls, black against the dull concrete, a visceral splatter that painted a terrifying tableau. "Liam," Jax shouted, a primal roar of disbelief and agony, stepping back toward the room, his hand instinctively reaching out, as if he could somehow pull our friend back from the abyss. I grabbed his arm, yanking him back with a strength I didn't know I possessed, a desperate, adrenaline-fueled surge. "We can't help him, run!" Finn was already ahead of us, a blur of motion, sprinting down the corridor toward the ladder. I could hear the terrible sounds of the creature feeding. Wet, tearing noises, sickeningly loud, mixed with Liam's rapidly weakening, gurgling cries which quickly faded into silence. We reached the ladder. Finn practically threw himself down the opening, his body a desperate tumble. Jax pushed me ahead of him. "Go, Ethan, go." I descended as quickly as I dared, my hands slipping on the metal rungs, slick with my own sweat, or perhaps the blood that now coated the air. Jax followed right above me, his breathing ragged with panic, each gasp a desperate struggle for air. When my feet hit the cold concrete floor of the lower level, I immediately backed away from the ladder, my flashlight beam cutting a frantic arc through the overwhelming darkness. Finn stood a few feet away, bent over with his hands on his knees, gasping for breath, his chest heaving. "What the hell was that thing?" he choked out between ragged breaths, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know, and I don't want to find out," I said, grabbing his arm, pulling him upright. "We need to find the way back up to Chloe. Now." A splash sounded from somewhere nearby, not from the direction we'd come, but from one of the other tunnels branching off from the room with the circular tanks. Then another splash from a different direction, followed by what sounded like something heavy dragging across wet concrete. A sickening slither that seemed to vibrate through the very floor. Jax grabbed my hand, his palms slick with sweat or water or something else entirely. "There's more of them," he whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible. "They're in the containment tanks, all around us, or they're coming from deeper down." The sounds were growing. Splashing, slithering, a faint, high-pitched chittering noise that might have been communication, a new, horrifying element to the terror. Whatever the creatures were, they weren't confined to that single pool. The entire facility seemed to be coming alive around us, a symphony of monstrous sound. "The exit," I gasped, pulling Jax toward what I thought was the tunnel we'd originally come through. "We need to get back to the ladder." Finn followed close behind as we rushed into the darkness, our flashlight beams bouncing wildly with each desperate step. The tunnel split ahead, and I hesitated, suddenly unsure which way we'd come. My memory, usually so precise, was a blur of panic and adrenaline. "This way," Jax said, tugging me toward the left passage, his voice strained. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. The slap of wet limbs against concrete, the sliding of massive bodies through the tunnels, and underneath it all, a chorus of those low, guttural growling sounds we'd heard from the pool, now multiplied and coming from all directions, an entire hidden ecosystem awakened. I ran alongside Jax, fear a cold, hard knot in my stomach, propelling me forward into the unknown darkness. Finn's footsteps pounded behind us, occasionally faltering as he glanced back at whatever monstrous shapes might be following, whatever hungry things lurked just beyond the reach of our trembling flashlights. In that moment, I knew with terrible certainty that we had awakened something that should have remained sleeping, something that had been deliberately contained and forgotten in this underground maze. And now it was hunting us. The tunnels blurred around us as we ran, our flashlight beams slashing wildly through the oppressive darkness. Water splashed beneath our feet with each hurried step, the echoing footfalls bouncing like frantic gunshots in the confined space. I could still hear, with horrifying clarity, the wet tearing sounds of Liam's death behind us, still see his body jerking in the creature's massive, eyeless jaws. The image was burned into my mind, a permanent scar. "Which way?" Finn gasped, skidding to a halt at a junction where three identical, dark passages extended into the impenetrable blackness. His voice was ragged. On the verge of breaking, Jax swung his flashlight wildly between the options, his breath coming in ragged, desperate bursts. I don't know. I think we came from the middle one." "You think?" Finn's voice cracked with raw hysteria. "Just pick one," Jax hissed, glancing behind us. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, closer. Wet, slithering noises interrupted by that strange, rhythmic clicking and low growling we'd heard before, now more frequent, more insistent, like a pack of predators closing in for the kill without further discussion. Driven by blind panic and the certainty of pursuit, we plunged into the leftmost tunnel. our footsteps splashing through shallow puddles that had formed on the uneven concrete. After running for what felt like minutes but could have been mere seconds, the tunnel widened abruptly into a chamber I didn't recognize. Massive, corroded pipes lined the walls, some broken and leaking dark, viscous water onto the concrete floor. The ceiling arched higher here, vanishing beyond the reach of our flashlights, lost in a suffocating blackness. "This isn't right," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't come through here before. This is completely new territory." Jax ran a trembling hand through his hair, leaving it standing on end. "We must have taken a wrong turn. Everything looks the same down here." Finn kicked an empty, rusted metal canister in frustration, sending it clattering across the floor. The sound reverberated throughout the chamber, bouncing off the walls and ceiling in unnatural, distorted ways, an explosion of noise in the chilling silence. "Keep it down," Jax snapped, grabbing Finn's arm, his voice sharp with terror. We froze, listening. The pursuing noises had stopped. The sudden, profound silence that followed was somehow worse than the sounds of the chase, more terrifying than the immediate threat. It was as if whatever hunted us was now listening too, pinpointing our exact location, taking its time, savoring the moment. Then we heard it. A series of clicks and whistles, complex and rhythmic, traveled through the tunnels. It wasn't random. It was patterned. It was almost like, "Is that talking?" Finn whispered, his face pale and drawn in the dim beam of his flashlight, his eyes wide with a new, dawning horror. The sounds repeated, a complex series of sharp clicks, soft whistles, and low, resonant rumbling tones that seemed to form distinct, deliberate patterns. It didn't sound random. It sounded like communication, like an organized hunt. "We need to find the way back," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, to assert some semblance of control over the spiraling panic. "Chloe is waiting for us. She'll be worried sick." Jax nodded, sweeping his flashlight around the room. "There are 4 exits from this chamber. One of them has to lead back to the ladder." "It just has to. We should split up," Finn suggested, already backing toward one of the passages, his voice laced with desperate logic. "Cover more ground. When someone finds the way out, they can call the others." "No." I grabbed his arm, digging my fingers into his sleeve, my grip surprisingly strong. "We stay together, no matter what. That's how Liam died. That's how people get separated and picked off." "Ethan's right," Jax said, his voice firm, overriding Finn's frantic suggestion. "Splitting up is how people die in horror movies. Or in real life in places like this." Finn gave a shaky, nervous laugh. "This isn't a movie." "No," I said grimly. "It's worse." The clicking sounds intensified, now coming from multiple directions, encircling us. Something about their cadence had changed, become more urgent, more excited, almost triumphant. I couldn't shake the terrible feeling that the creatures were coordinating, communicating our position to each other, closing a net around us. "Let's try this way," Jax said, pointing to the passage directly across from where we'd entered. "It slopes upward slightly, might lead back to the upper levels, might be a maintenance tunnel we missed." We moved forward cautiously, our earlier blind panic giving way to more focused, concentrated terror. Each step was deliberate, each breath controlled, trying to minimize noise. The tunnel Jax had chosen was narrower than the others, forcing us to walk single file. Jax led with me in the middle and Finn bringing up the rear, his presence a small comfort, a confirmation that I wasn't alone yet. The clicking sounds followed us, sometimes seeming to recede, other times growing alarmingly close, almost breathing down our necks. Occasionally we heard something else, a scraping noise like massive claws or teeth against concrete, and the distinctive wet slithering sound of massive bodies moving through unseen water. "He hurting us," Finn whispered from behind me, his voice barely audible, thick with dread. I glanced back, my blood running cold. "What?" The sounds. They're loudest from the directions they don't want us to go. They're driving us somewhere. A profound chill ran down my spine. Finn was right. The noises weren't random. They changed whenever we changed direction, almost like the creatures were coordinating to push us deeper into the facility, into a trap, rather than toward an exit. They were intelligent. Horrifyingly intelligent. "Jax, wait," I called softly, pulling on his jacket. "We need to rethink this." He paused, turning back to face us, his eyes wide with desperate inquiry. "What is it?" Before I could explain Finn's horrifying theory, a different sound cut through the darkness. A wet, rushing noise, like a massive wave surging through a narrow space. It came from a small, almost imperceptible side passage we had just passed, partially hidden behind a cluster of corroded pipes. Finn turned his flashlight toward the sound, his face a mask of dawning horror. What was that? It happened so fast, I barely registered the movement. A pale, glistening limb shot from the absolute darkness of the side passage. Not an arm or a leg, but something more like a tentacle or a proboscis, thick as my thigh, segmented, and covered in what looked like rows of quivering, suction cup-like protuberances. It wrapped around Finn's ankle with sickening speed, yanking him off his feet before either of us could react. Finn screamed as he hit the ground, his flashlight spinning away across the concrete, its beam erratic and frantic. He clawed desperately at the floor, his fingernails breaking as they scraped against the rough, unforgiving concrete. "Help me," he shrieked, his voice cracking with terror, echoing in the confined space. Jax lunged for Finn's outstretched hand, missing it by mere inches as Finn was dragged into the side passage with horrifying, unnatural speed. I grabbed Jax's jacket, pulling him back, my own heart pounding like a drum against my ribs, as something massive moved in the darkness beyond. A pale, undulating form that momentarily blocked the narrow passage. Finn's screams rang through the tunnels, growing fainter, more muffled, as he was pulled farther and farther away into the blackness. Then came a wet, sickening crunching sound, followed by a series of gurgles, and his cries cut off abruptly, definitively. Silence. A deeper, more absolute silence than before, now broken only by our ragged breathing. "Finn," Jax called, his voice a raw, heartbroken cry, a desperate plea to the empty darkness. I pulled him away from the passage, tears streaming down my face, blurring my vision. "We can't help him, Jax. He's gone. We have to go now." Jax stood frozen, staring into the impenetrable darkness where Finn had disappeared, his face a mask of shock and grief. "We can't just— he's gone," I said, the words bitter as ash as I spoke them. "Just like Liam, if we don't move now, we'll be next." The clicking sounds around us had changed again, faster now, more excited, a triumphant chorus that chilled me to the bone. The slithering noises grew louder, converging from multiple directions, indicating that the creatures were no longer just hurting us. They were closing in for the kill. Jax's face hardened, his shock giving way to a grim, desperate determination. Which way? I swept my flashlight across our immediate surroundings, trying to think despite my intense, paralyzing fear. The tunnel continued straight ahead, but I noticed a smaller passage branching off to the right, almost hidden behind a cluster of particularly thick pipes. It was low, narrow, a crawl space. "There," I pointed, my voice a desperate croak. "That might lead somewhere they don't expect. It's too small for them." We squeezed through the narrow opening, the rusted pipes scraping against our clothes, their rough surfaces biting at our skin. This new passage was barely wide enough for our shoulders, and the ceiling was so low we had to duck our heads, crawling on hands and knees. It smelled of mildew and stagnant water, but underneath was that same cloying metallic odor I'd noticed when we first entered the facility, now infused with the faint, sickening scent of fresh blood. As we moved deeper into this cramped, suffocating space, I noticed something strange. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, almost imperceptible, as if the creatures couldn't or wouldn't follow us here. "Backing off," Jax whispered, noticing the same thing, his voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Maybe they can't fit." "Maybe," I suggested, though something told me that wasn't the entire explanation. The thought that they might be waiting for us to emerge, or that smaller ones might be able to navigate these narrow passages, was a chilling prospect. We continued forward, the passage occasionally branching or twisting sharply. I tried to maintain a mental map, but soon lost track of our direction in the maze-like, oppressive system. The only constant was that we seemed to be moving upward, gradually ascending through the facility, the air growing marginally less stale with each painful foot of progress. After what felt like an eternity of creeping through the claustrophobic passage, Jax stopped abruptly. "Listen," I held my breath, my ears straining in the stifling silence. At first I heard nothing but the frantic beat of my own heart. Then I caught it, the faint, irregular sound of water dripping, but with a different quality than before. Each drop made a distinctive, hollow sound, suggesting a larger space ahead, an echo chamber. "Might be a way out," Jax said, hope coloring his voice for the first time since we'd lost Finn. "A vertical shaft, maybe. Or a ventilation system." We pressed forward, pushing through the last few feet of the cramped passage. The pipe eventually opened into a wider tunnel, lined with electrical conduits and smaller pipes. Emergency lights, ancient and corroded, glowed dimly at intervals, their batteries somehow still functioning after decades of abandonment, casting long, eerie shadows. "We're in a maintenance access tunnel," Jax said, sweeping his flashlight along the walls, his voice regaining a fraction of its usual confidence. "These usually connect to multiple sections of a facility, they lead everywhere. He was right. The tunnel branched repeatedly, forming a complex network that likely ran throughout the entire complex. One of these paths surely had to lead back to the main level, back to the surface, back to Chloe. As we paused at another junction, trying to determine the best route, Jax's breathing grew ragged, strained. The adrenaline that had carried us this far was wearing off, leaving behind crushing exhaustion and raw, unfiltered fear. Each breath he took seemed louder than the last, echoing, bouncing around in the confined space. "Jax," I whispered, placing my hand on his arm, trying to keep my voice calm, steady. "You need to breathe quieter." He nodded, trying desperately to control his breathing, but the panic was too deeply set. His chest heaved with each desperate gulp of air, ragged and loud. Then I realized something terrifying, something that sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. "They respond to sound," I whispered, my eyes wide with the horrifying realization. "What?" Jax managed between gasps. "The creatures. They tracked us by sound. Fin throwing the concrete, their noises changing whenever we made a sound, them hurting us by making noise in other tunnels." Jax's eyes widened with understanding, a dawning horror reflected in their depths. He pressed a hand over his mouth, trying desperately to muffle his gasping breaths, but it was too late. From somewhere behind us, from the cramped passage we had just exited, came the now familiar, sickening slithering sound, growing louder with each passing second. They'd found us again, or perhaps they'd simply been waiting. "Run," I hissed, pushing Jax forward. We sprinted down the tunnel, no longer concerned with stealth, our desperate footsteps thundering against the metal grating of the floor. But it didn't matter anymore. They already knew where we were. The tunnel ended abruptly at a heavy metal door, thick and rusted, marked with faded stencils. Jax yanked on the handle, and by some impossible miracle, it opened with a shriek of tortured metal. We tumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind us. Jax braced his body against it while I frantically searched for a lock or a barricade. "There," Jax pointed to a heavy metal bar leaning against the wall, a thick, rusty pry bar. I grabbed it and jammed it through the door handle, wedging the other end against the concrete floor. It wouldn't hold for long against whatever was out there, but it might buy us precious minutes. As our panic subsided enough to take in our surroundings, I realized we'd found some kind of isolated maintenance room. Metal shelves lined the walls, stocked with dusty, corroded equipment and tools, wrenches, pliers, strange, archaic-looking scientific instruments. A workbench stood against one wall, covered in what looked like electrical components and faded schematics, blueprints of complex machinery. The only light came from our flashlights and a single, weak emergency bulb, flickering weakly in the high ceiling, its dim glow casting long, dancing shadows. "What is this place?" Jax asked, his voice barely above a whisper, raw with exhaustion and fear. "Looks like a repair station or a central maintenance hub," I said, examining the room more closely, trying to find anything that could help us. Along one wall ran a large, faded blueprint of what appeared to be the facility's layout. Most of it was faded beyond recognition, but key portions were still visible, surprisingly detailed. "Jax, look." I directed my flashlight to the blueprint. "This might show us the way out, a complete overview of the facility." He joined me, his eyes quickly scanning the faded lines and symbols. Can you make sense of it?" I traced my finger along what looked like a vertical shaft. "I think this is the original ladder we came down. And this," I pointed to another area, a complex network of branching tunnels, "might be where we are now. This room." Jax squinted at the blueprint, his brow furrowed in concentration. "If that's right, we need to go back the way we came, then take the second right instead of the third. It seems to lead to a main access tunnel higher up." A heavy, sickening thud against the door made us both jump. The metal bar we'd used as a barricade moved slightly, groaning but held. Another thud followed, stronger than the first, a sickening, wet impact that made the entire door shudder. "They found us," Jax whispered, his face pale with fear, his eyes wide with a desperate, trapped animal's terror. I stepped away from the blueprint, scanning the room frantically for anything that might help us, anything at all. "There has to be another way out of here. A secondary exit." "Ethan," Jax said, his voice suddenly calm in a way that frightened me more than his panic had, a chilling resignation. "If I don't make it, don't," I cut him off, shaking my head vehemently, tears stinging my eyes. "Don't you dare say goodbye, Jax. We're getting out of this, both of us." The metal door shuddered under another impact, stronger this time. The bar, groaning loudly, bent further, visibly deforming. Jax pulled me into a tight, desperate embrace, his arms trembling. "I love you, Ethan. I should have listened to you from the beginning. I'm so sorry. For everything, I buried my face in his shoulder, my tears soaking into his shirt, a hot stream against my cold cheek. We're going to get out of this together, Jax. We have to, but even as I said the words, I knew our chances were slim, vanishing with each terrifying impact. The door wouldn't hold much longer. Another crashing impact against the door made the metal bar bend further, screeching in protest. Jax gripped my shoulders, his eyes darting around the maintenance room, searching frantically for any other escape route. The shelves, the tools, the workbench, nothing seemed useful against the creatures hunting us. Maybe we can use these to fight, Jax said, grabbing a heavy wrench from a nearby shelf, its weight insignificant in his shaking hand. The desperation in his voice was clear, raw. We both knew a wrench would be useless against creatures that had torn Liam and Finn apart in seconds, but it was a primal, futile gesture of defiance. I turned back to the blueprint, my mind racing, desperately searching for another exit, another path. My flashlight beam trembled across the faded paper, revealing a complex network of pipes running throughout the facility, some labeled as ventilation, others as waste disposal. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a series of maintenance pipes that appeared to connect to the upper levels, some specifically marked as access conduits. These might lead back to a sharp, shrill ringtone cut through the suffocating silence, a jarring, impossible sound in the depths of that place. Jax fumbled in his pocket, pulling out his phone. The screen illuminated his face with an eerie blue glow. The impossible had happened. Somehow in this underground maze, a signal had reached his phone. "Chloe," he whispered, staring at the screen, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and frantic hope. He tapped the notification, and Chloe's voice suddenly filled the room, amplified and distorted by the phone's tiny speaker, panicked, breathless, and far too loud. "Jax, Ethan, where are you guys? It's been over 40 minutes. I'm freaking out. I tried calling for help, but there's barely any signal out here. I think I heard something moving inside the building. Please call me back as soon as you..." Jax frantically lowered the volume, but it was too late. The pounding on the door stopped abruptly. The sudden, profound silence that followed was somehow worse than the crashing had been. They heard, I whispered, backing away from the door, my blood turning to ice. Jax shoved his phone back into his pocket, his face a mask of grim resolve. "We need to move, now." The clicking sounds we'd heard before started again, rapid, excited patterns, coming from directly outside the door, almost pressed against it. Then came a new sound, something scraping against the ceiling above us, a guttural rasp that sent shivers down my spine. I looked up, my flashlight beam cutting a desperate arc, just as a ceiling panel moved, shifting slightly. Dark, viscous water, or something like it, dripped from the edges of the opening, splattering onto the floor with a soft, sickening plop. There, Jax pointed to a large pipe opening near the floor on the far side of the room. The cover, rusted and ancient, had been removed, leaving a dark passage just wide enough for a person to crawl through. A last-ditch, desperate escape. We lunged for it together, a synchronized act of terror. As we reached the pipe opening, the ceiling above us gave way with a sickening crack of concrete and metal. Something massive and pale, a nightmare-given form, dropped into the room behind us. A writhing, serpentine body, glistening wetly, similar to what we'd seen before but smaller, more agile, seemed to pour from the ceiling. It landed with a wet slap against the concrete floor, its multi-jointed form already coiling. Jax pushed me toward the pipe. "Get in, go!" I dropped to my knees and scrambled into the opening. The pipe was cold and damp, smelling of rust and stagnant water, but also that sickly sweet, metallic odor. I crawled forward a few feet, then twisted my body to look back, my flashlight beam illuminating Jax as he was halfway into the pipe, his eyes wide with terror and something else, a chilling, heartbreaking resignation. The creature moved with terrifying speed, its eyeless head swinging toward the sound of our movement. It lunged across the room, a pale blur, as Jax was halfway into the pipe. "Jax," I screamed, reaching for him, my fingers brushing against the rough fabric of his jacket. His eyes met mine, wide with terror, but also a profound, agonizing love. "Run, Ethan," he said, his voice steady, even though I could hear the fear in his throat, the tremor in his hands. "Don't look back." He pushed me further into the pipe, a desperate shove that sent me sprawling deeper into the cold, dark confines. Then he suddenly jerked backward, violently. The creature had seized his legs, its pale limb wrapping around his calf, its rows of suckers gripping tight. Jax slammed his hand against the inside of the pipe, his fingers leaving bloody streaks on the metal, a desperate final attempt to anchor himself. "Go," he shouted, his voice breaking, raw with pain and finality. "I love you," the creature pulled harder and in human strength. Jax's body twisted and was dragged back into the room, disappearing from my sight. I reached for him, our fingertips brushing for one final, agonizing moment before he was yanked away, consumed by the darkness and the horror. Whatever followed was a sequence of sounds I will never forget. Jax's scream abruptly cut short, a wet, tearing noise, the sickening splash of liquid against concrete. The creature's excited clicking, growing faster and more frenzied, now joined by faint, distant echoes of similar clicks, like a celebratory chorus. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it didn't help. The sounds resonated in my bones, in my very soul. Tears streamed down my face as I backed deeper into the pipe, moving away from the unimaginable horror in the maintenance room. Every instinct screamed at me to go back, to fight, to help Jax somehow, but I knew there was nothing I could do. Jax was gone, just like Liam. Just like Finn, I forced myself to turn away, to face the darkness ahead. My flashlight beam sliced through the gloom, revealing a tunnel that stretched beyond my light's reach, an endless, claustrophobic passage. I had no choice but to move forward. The pipe angled upward slightly, giving me a desperate flicker of hope that it might indeed lead to the upper levels. To the surface, to escape, I crawled on my hands and knees, the rough, cold metal scraping my palms and tearing at my jeans. My breathing resounded loudly in the confined space, each inhale tasting of rust and decay, of fear and loss. Behind me, I could hear the creature attempting to follow, its massive body slamming against the pipe entrance, making the entire passage vibrate, a low, guttural growl rumbling through the metal. The pipe was too narrow for it to fit, at least the one I'd seen. The chilling thought that smaller ones might be able to navigate these pipes spurred me forward with renewed, desperate panic. After what felt like an eternity of crawling, my muscles screaming in protest, the pipe branched into 3 separate directions. I paused, my light bouncing frantically between the options. The left and right passages continued horizontally, while the center one angled more sharply upward. Up seemed like the right choice, closer to the surface, closer to escape, closer to air that didn't taste of death. I squeezed into the middle passage, which was even tighter than the one before. My shoulders scraped painfully against the sides, and I had to turn my head sideways to fit, my spine protesting. The claustrophobia was almost as terrifying as the creatures themselves. Each breath came with greater difficulty, the stuffy air seeming to thin with every passing minute. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision, and I realized I was hyperventilating, on the verge of passing out. "Breathe," I whispered to myself, the word a desperate mantra. "Just breathe, stay conscious." I forced myself to slow down, to take measured, shallow breaths, despite the panic screaming through my body. I needed to stay conscious. Passing out in these pipes would mean certain death. Trapped and helpless, the passage twisted and turned, sometimes branching again. At each junction, I chose the path that seemed to lead upward, relying on an instinct that felt more like a prayer than a navigational skill, hoping my sense of direction wasn't completely skewed in this underground maze of terror. As I crawled, my mind kept returning to Jax's final moments. The way he'd pushed me ahead, the look in his eyes when he realized he wouldn't make it, his final, desperate, "I love you." Guilt and grief, sharp as broken glass, threatened to overwhelm me, to make me give up. But I channeled it into a cold, fierce determination. I would survive this. I would escape, for Jax, for Liam, for Finn, for all of them. Their sacrifices would not be in vain. After what seemed like hours but might have been minutes, I felt something change. A faint current of air, surprisingly cool and fresh, brushed against my face, not the stale, oppressive underground air I'd been breathing, but something from outside. Following the subtle draft, I pushed forward with renewed, desperate energy. The pipe eventually opened into a wider, vertical shaft, with metal rungs embedded in the side, a familiar, albeit larger, maintenance access shaft. I pulled myself out of the horizontal pipe, my muscles screaming in protest after being cramped for so long, my body stiff and aching. Standing on the narrow platform, I shined my light upward. The shaft continued for about 20 feet before ending at what looked like a solid, unyielding hatch or panel. Below it, the shaft descended into darkness, so profound my flashlight couldn't penetrate it. From that darkness came the now familiar, terrifying sounds, clicking, slithering, the splash of unseen bodies moving through water. They were still hunting me. They were down there. I grabbed the first rung and began to climb, ignoring the searing pain in my hands, the exhaustion weighing down my limbs, the raw despair in my heart. Each movement sent sounds echoing down the shaft, alerting my pursuers to my location, but there was nothing I could do about that now. Escape was the only option. As I neared the top, I could see that what I thought was a solid hatch was actually a ventilation grate, thick and heavily bolted. I pushed against it with my shoulder, but it didn't budge. Panic flared inside me as I heard the creatures getting closer below, their clicks now a frenzied chorus, their growls deep and guttural, resonating up the shaft. Bracing myself against the rungs, I slammed my shoulder against the grate again, putting all my remaining strength behind the impact. Pain shot through my arm, a blinding agony, but the metal shifted slightly, groaning. I hit it again, then again, a desperate, animalistic cry escaping my lips with each blow. This time the grate broke free, tearing from its rusted hinges and clattering loudly onto the floor above. I pulled myself through the opening, my arms trembling with the effort, muscles screaming in protest. Rolling onto my back, gasping for breath, I found myself in a recognizable corridor, one of the first we'd explored when we entered the facility. I was back on the main level relief, sharp and overwhelming, flooded through me, quickly followed by a renewed, desperate urgency. I wasn't safe yet. I needed to find Chloe and get out. Chloe, I called, my voice raw and hoarse, a desperate croak. There was no answer. I staggered to my feet, disoriented but driven by the primal need to escape. The main entrance had to be nearby. We hadn't ventured far from it when we first arrived. The sounds from below grew louder, more insistent. The creatures were finding their way up through the facility's network of pipes and shafts. They were learning, adapting. I started running, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the walls, each corridor looking the same, a nightmarish maze of identical doorways and branching paths. Then I spotted it, the door we'd first entered through, now hanging open, a dark rectangle against the fading light of the outside world. Beyond it lay darkness, but it was a different kind of darkness, natural night, rather than the oppressive, hungry black of the underground chambers. Chloe, I called again as I approached the exit, my voice a desperate plea. Chloe, are you there? Only silence answered me. Had she left to get help, or had the creatures somehow found her too? I didn't have time to search. The clicking sounds were getting closer, converging from multiple directions, a chilling symphony of pursuit. I sprinted toward the exit, my lungs burning with each breath, a searing pain in my chest. As I burst through the doorway, the cool night air hit my face like a blessing, clean and fresh and alive. Stars glimmered overhead, impossibly bright after hours in the suffocating darkness below. I kept running, fueled by pure adrenaline, heading for the fence we'd climbed through earlier, the promise of freedom just beyond. Chloe, I screamed, looking around frantically for any sign of her. The truck was still parked where we'd left it, but there was no movement around it, no sign of life. I was halfway across the grounds, nearing the fence, when it happened. Blinding light erupted from all directions, so intense I threw my arm over my eyes, momentarily blinded. Massive floodlights, hidden until now, had activated, illuminating the entire area in harsh, unnatural white light, turning night into an eerie, artificial day. Dark figures emerged from behind the blinding glare, human shapes moving with military precision. They surrounded me in seconds, their faces obscured by helmets and night vision equipment, weapons raised, laser sights painting crimson dots on my chest. Freeze. Don't move, a voice commanded through a megaphone. Distorted and authoritative, I stopped, raising my hands instinctively. My legs nearly gave out beneath me as the adrenaline that had carried me this far began to fade, leaving behind only crushing exhaustion and raw terror. From behind the line of silent, unmoving soldiers stepped a figure different from the rest. A person in a full, gleaming hazmat suit, the face shield reflecting the floodlights so I couldn't see who was inside, only a distorted alien reflection of myself. Subject secured, the hazmat figure said into a radio, voice slightly muffled but clearly masculine, calm and clinical amidst the chaos. Then he approached me directly, stopping a few feet away, his movements deliberate, unhurried. Ethan Reynolds, he said, not a question, but a confirmation, a terrifying display of knowledge. You shouldn't be here, my friends, I gasped, my voice breaking, raw and ragged. They're still inside, there are creatures. We know, the hazmat man interrupted, his voice devoid of emotion. Your friends are already dead. Recovery teams have confirmed it. The bluntness of his statement hit me like a physical blow, a sudden, sharp pain that eclipsed all others. I staggered backward, nearly falling. How do you? We've been monitoring this facility for decades, he said, his voice flat, matter-of-fact. "Nothing goes in or out without our knowledge." "Then why didn't you stop us?" I demanded, anger sharp and hot, cutting through my fear. "Why didn't you warn us?" The man in the hazmat suit tilted his head slightly, studying me through his reflective face shield. "That's a complicated question, Mr. Reynolds, with a classified answer." Behind me, from the gaping entrance of the facility, came the wet, slithering sounds I'd grown to fear, growing louder, closer. The soldiers tensed, weapons swinging toward the doorway. "Sir, we have movement," one of them called out, his voice tense. "Contain it," the hazmat man ordered without looking away from me, his composure unnerving. "Ethan Reynolds, you're coming with us. There are questions that need answering." Two soldiers approached me, one on each side. They gripped my arms firmly but not roughly, their grip inescapable. "What about Chloe?" I asked, still looking around desperately. "My friend who stayed up here, where is she?" The hazmat man gestured toward a dark vehicle parked beyond the floodlights, some kind of military transport, low-slung and ominous. "Your friend is already in custody, Mr. Reynolds. She will be processed separately." Processed. The cold, clinical term sent a chill through me worse than any I'd felt in the dark tunnels below. "What about Jax, Liam?" "Finn?" I asked, though I already knew the answer, the words a desperate, hollow plea. "As I said," he replied, his voice unyielding. "They're dead, and as far as the world is concerned, this facility remains abandoned. Nothing happened here tonight." Gunfire erupted behind us, short, controlled bursts aimed at the facility entrance. I heard the creatures' high-pitched shrieks of pain or rage, sounds we hadn't heard from them before, a new, terrifying dimension to their existence. The soldiers holding me began moving me toward the transport vehicle, their pace urgent but not panicked. "What are those things?" I asked as they guided me away, my voice a desperate whisper. "What is this place really?" The hazmat man walked alongside us, his gait strangely casual amidst the chaos. "Those are questions better answered elsewhere, Mr. Reynolds. This location is no longer secure." As we reached the vehicle, I looked back one last time at the Arclight Research Complex. In the harsh, alien glare of the floodlights, it looked different, less like an abandoned relic, and more like what it truly was. A prison that had failed to contain its inmates, a tomb of secrets. The door of the transport slid open, revealing a sterile, stark interior with bench seating and thick, integrated restraints. No sign of Chloe inside. "Where is she?" I demanded, straining against their grip. "You said Chloe was here." The hazmat man placed a hand on my shoulder, guiding me inside. "I said she was in custody, Mr. Reynolds. Not that she was in this particular vehicle." Before I could respond, something sharp pricked my arm. I looked down to see one of the soldiers withdrawing a syringe, the liquid inside clear and viscous. "Standard procedure," the hazmat man said as my vision began to blur, the world tilting, the bright lights becoming fuzzy halos. "For your own safety." The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was his reflective face shield, showing me a distorted, terrifying version of my own terrified expression, shrinking into a pinprick sterile white light pierced my eyelids. The pounding in my head intensified as consciousness returned in painful, disorienting waves. My mouth was bone dry, and my limbs felt impossibly heavy, like lead. I tried to move my arms, but found them secured to the bed with soft, yet firm, restraints. A steady, rhythmic beeping sound pulsed nearby, matching the throbbing behind my temples. I forced my eyes open. The ceiling above me had white acoustic tiles, bland and impersonal. I was in a hospital room or something like it. No windows, one door, solid and metallic, with a small, reinforced glass panel. An IV dripped clear fluid into my arm. The digital clock on the wall read 3:47, though whether it was morning or afternoon, I couldn't tell. "He's awake," a voice said from somewhere outside my field of vision, cool and detached. Footsteps approached. A woman in crisp military fatigues appeared beside my bed, her face utterly expressionless as she checked my vital signs on a portable monitor. She didn't speak to me or acknowledge my attempts to ask questions, merely taking notes on a tablet before leaving without a word. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours before the door opened again. The man in the hazmat suit entered, though he'd removed the helmet, revealing a severe face with salt and pepper hair, cut military short, and piercing gray eyes that looked at me with clinical detachment, like a scientist observing a specimen. "Ethan Reynolds," he said, pulling a chair beside my bed, the scrape of its legs against the tile floor unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "I'm Dr. Julian Reeves. How are you feeling? Where am I?" My voice came out as a rasp, raw and weak. "A secure medical facility," he replied, which told me nothing. You've been unconscious for approximately 18 hours while we monitored you for contamination. Contamination, exposure to the organisms. Fortunately, your blood work shows no signs of infection. You are remarkably robust, Mr. Reynolds. My memory flooded back in horrific flashes. The Arclight Research Complex, the tunnels, the creatures, Liam torn apart, Finn dragged away, Jack sacrificing himself so I could escape. My friends, I whispered, the word a plea, a protest. You said they were dead. Dr. Reeves's expression didn't change. They are. Recovery teams confirmed it. And Chloe, your friend who remained outside, is being held in another section of this facility. She's unharmed, physically at least. I tugged at my restraints, a sudden surge of adrenaline giving me a momentary burst of futile strength. Why am I tied down? Standard procedure for potentially contaminated subjects. I'll have them removed now that you're stable. He nodded to someone beyond my vision, and a moment later, a different soldier approached and loosened the straps around my wrists. I rubbed the red marks left behind, the skin raw and chafed. What were those things? That's a complex question, Dr. Reeves said, his voice level calm. One that requires considerable context. I watched 3 people get torn apart, I said, my voice rising, gaining strength despite my weakness. I think I deserve answers. Something flickered across his face, not quite sympathy, but perhaps an acknowledgement of my trauma. You're right, but first, you need to understand the gravity of your situation. Everything you witnessed is classified at the highest levels. Your cooperation is not optional, Mr. Reynolds. The threat beneath his clinical tone was unmistakable. When can I leave? I asked. That depends on how our conversations proceed over the next few days. Days. The word seemed ominous, a sentence rather than a time frame, as we both understood what it meant. I need to call my parents. They'll be worried. A cover story has been established, he replied, unfazed. As far as anyone knows, you and your friends went camping in Pinewood National Forest. Search and rescue operations are currently underway. The area experienced an unexpected severe flash flood. I felt a profound, chilling disturbance by how casually he described changing our true whereabouts, twisting reality. The government had already decided our story. No one would ever know what really happened at the Arclight complex. Rest for now, Dr. Reeves said, standing. We'll begin our formal debriefing tomorrow. You'll be moved to more comfortable quarters once medical clearance is complete. After he left, I lay staring at the white acoustic tiles of the ceiling, too numb to cry, too exhausted to feel anything but a hollow ache. Somewhere in this building, Chloe was being held, probably as terrified and confused as I was. My friends were dead, brutally murdered, and the only people who knew the truth were the ones who had covered it up for decades. The more comfortable quarters turned out to be a small, dormitory-style room with a bed, a simple metal desk, and an attached bathroom. No windows here either, but at least there were no restraints. My clothes had been replaced with plain gray sweatpants and a coarse, plain t-shirt. No phone, no computer, no contact with the outside world. For 3 days, Dr. Reeves interrogated me in a windowless conference room, recording every detail of our exploration. He made me recount each moment, from our arrival at the facility to my capture outside. I described the creatures in chilling detail, their eyeless heads, their rows of needle-like teeth, the way they moved, the sickening wet sounds they made, the chilling clicks and whistles that suggested their horrifying intelligence. I relived Liam's death, Finn's capture, Jax's sacrifice, the sounds, the sights, the smells. Each retelling was like reopening a fresh wound, bleeding me dry of my sanity. Dr. Reeves took notes on a tablet, his face impassive, occasionally stopping me to clarify minute details. He seemed particularly interested in the creature's behavior, their coordinated hunting techniques, their apparent ability to hurt us, and their response to sound. He asked about the symbols, the advanced technology, the purpose of the tanks. On the 4th day, the pattern changed. When I entered the conference room, Dr. Reeves wasn't alone. 2 stern men in crisp military uniforms stood against the wall, watching me with flat, evaluative stares. Mr. Reynolds, Dr. Reeves began, his voice calm, measured. You've been very cooperative. In light of that, I've been authorized to explain certain aspects of what you encountered. I sat across from him, my hands clasped tightly, waiting for the truth, however horrifying it might be. The Arclight Research Complex was never an atmospheric research station. That was its cover. In reality, it was a deep Earth research station established in 1968 to study unique biological specimens recovered from an anomalous deep-sea geothermal vent during exploratory subaquatic operations. What we found was unlike anything ever documented. He slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a black and white photograph of what looked like a small, translucent, multi-segmented worm-like creature in a petri dish. The original specimens were microscopic extremophiles, capable of surviving extreme conditions. They exhibited remarkable regenerative properties and unprecedented, highly adaptable RNA structures. They were brought to Arclight for study, safely away from population centers, beneath layers of rock and concrete, shielded from the outside world. "What happened?" I asked, unable to reconcile the tiny creature in the photo with the monsters that had hunted us. "Progress happened. The Cold War happened," Dr. Reeves said, his voice almost a lament. He took back the tablet. "Initial research showed potential for medical applications, rapid tissue regeneration, accelerated healing, resistance to extreme conditions. Then the military became interested in other applications. Enhancements were attempted, genetic modifications, size acceleration, controlled proliferation. The specimens proved highly adaptive, Mr. Reynolds, highly intelligent. But controlling their growth and behavior became problematic. Problematic, I repeated, the word seeming absurdly, grotesquely inadequate. In 1983, Dr. Reeves continued, his gaze steady, after a containment breach resulted in the death of 12 researchers and the complete loss of a sub-level, the facility was officially decommissioned. The specimens were deemed too dangerous to transport and too resilient to destroy through conventional means. Even tactical nukes would not eliminate every living cell. Their regenerative properties were unforeseen. "So you just left them there for 50 years? I asked, my voice rising in disbelief and horror. "The facility was sealed. Convert into a deep earth monitoring station. We've observed the specimen's evolution from a safe distance. Until recently, they remained contained in the lower, flooded levels. The damage from the '83 incident made surface access nearly impossible for them. Until we showed up," I finished for him, the realization a bitter taste in my mouth. You knew they were active when we went in. We had concerns." His stare was steady, unwavering, but no physical breaches had occurred. "The facility remained structurally secure. Your presence was unexpected. An anomaly, then why not warn people away?" I demanded, anger flaring. "Put up signs, guards, anything." For the first time, Dr. Reeves looked uncomfortable, a faint flicker of something akin to regret in his gray eyes. "That would have drawn unwanted attention. The facility's existence remains classified, even within the government. Few know its true purpose or what it contains. A public warning would lead to questions, to probes, to a wider panic we simply could not afford. So we were, what? An experiment?" I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You watched us go in there to see what would happen, to test their behavior. No, your presence was unexpected, as I said. By the time our surveillance detected your group, you were already deep inside. Extraction teams were mobilized immediately, but we couldn't reach you before." He trailed off, the words unsaid. "Before my friends were killed," I finished for him, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. One of the military men stepped forward, his face hard. "Dr. Reeves, that's sufficient," Dr. Reeves nodded. "Mr. Reynolds, what you need to understand is that this incident cannot become public knowledge. The panic it would cause, the questions about government oversight, the potential for global instability, if the nature of these organisms were revealed, it would be catastrophic." "You want me to lie?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "To pretend they died some other way. We want you to recognize the necessity of discretion," the military man stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He placed a thick, sealed folder on the table and pushed it toward me. "This is a non-disclosure agreement. Signing it legally binds you to secrecy regarding everything you've witnessed and everything discussed in this facility. Forever." I opened the folder. Pages of dense legal text, small print, stared back at me, a labyrinth of legalese. "And if I refuse?" "That would be unwise, Mr. Reynolds," Dr. Reeves said quietly, his voice dangerously soft. "We prefer voluntary cooperation, but national security concerns take precedence over individual liberties in extreme cases." The threat was clear. "Sign or never leave this sterile, windowless room." "What about Chloe?" I asked, my voice thick with fear for her. "She's being presented with the same options. She's currently reviewing her own agreement." I flipped through the pages, scanning the contents, my eyes catching phrases like breach of national security, severe penalties, and indefinite detention. "And what do I get for my silence?" The The second military man spoke for the first time, his voice as devoid of warmth as his eyes. Compensation for your trauma and cooperation. He placed another document beside the NDA, a settlement offer. It was for $500,000, tax-free, plus all medical and psychological expenses related to this incident for the rest of my lifeblood money. That's what they were offering, a price for my friends' lives, for the truth. What about their families? I asked, my voice breaking. What will you tell them? That their children went camping, Dr. Reeves replied, his tone chillingly practiced, and encountered an unforeseen flash flood. That search and rescue did everything possible. That sometimes nature is cruel and bodies aren't recovered. I thought of Jax's parents, who had welcomed me into their home countless times, their kindness, their pride in their adventurous son. Of Liam's father, who had given him the expensive camera he carried everywhere, fostering his love for science and discovery. Of Finn's little sister, who idolized her adventure-seeking, prank-pulling older brother. The images of their heartbroken faces flashed through my mind. They deserved the truth, I said, tears blurring my vision. The truth would destroy them in ways you can't imagine, Dr. Reeves replied, his voice almost gentle, a cruel empathy. Some knowledge is too hard to bear. You already understand that, don't you, Ethan? The nightmares, the images seared into your mind. You wouldn't wish them on anyone, least of all the people who love those we've lost. He was right. The constant replay of the horror, the guilt, the raw, aching grief. I wouldn't wish this on anyone. With a hand that trembled slightly, I picked up the pen and signed both documents. As I did, a part of me died, sealed away, alongside my friends, in the dark, forgotten depths of that facility 3 weeks later. I stood beside Chloe at the edge of Jax's memorial service. No body to bury, just photographs and flowers surrounding an empty casket. His parents clung to each other near the front, their grief a tangible, raw presence in the air, so intense I could physically feel it, a suffocating weight. Chloe and I hadn't spoken much since our release. We'd been returned to the city separately, given the same instructions: stick to the story, honor the agreement, and move on with your lives. The settlement money sat untouched in my bank account. I couldn't bring myself to even look at it, much less use it. His mom asked me to say something, Chloe whispered, her face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. She had a haunted look in her eyes, just like mine. I don't know what to say, I replied, my voice a flat monotone. Say he was adventurous, she said, her voice catching. Say he lived fully, say he loved exploring new places. Just don't say how he really died. Don't say he was torn apart by bioengineered monsters in an abandoned government facility. Don't say the people who sent us away from here today know exactly what happened to him and let it happen. Chloe squeezed my hand once, a brief, desperate gesture of shared horror, before walking to the front of the gathering. Her voice shook as she shared sanitized memories of Jax, his laughter, his kindness, his passion for adventure. Each word was true, and yet a profound lie by omission. I couldn't bring myself to speak. What could I say that wouldn't either be a blatant lie or a betrayal of the agreement I'd signed, and a violation of the fragile peace I was trying to construct? So I stood silently, accepting condolences from people who would never know the real reason for my hollow eyes and trembling hands. After the service, Jax's mother embraced me, her body trembling with grief. He loved you so much, Ethan, she said, her voice raw from crying. I know how much you loved him too. The truth caught in my throat. He died saving me. He pushed me ahead of him so I could escape. His last words were that he loved me. I did, was all I managed to say, the word a whisper. The police said you were lucky to have gotten separated from the others before the flash flood, she continued, desperate for comfort. God was watching over you that day, not God, government surveillance. They were watching the whole time, but I nodded and let her find what comfort she could in her version of events. If you ever want to talk about him, she offered, pulling back, her eyes red-rimmed, our door is always open to you. But it wasn't, not really. Because I could never enter their home again without feeling overwhelmed by my lies, without feeling the crushing weight of the secret. I could never look into their eyes and not see Jax's face in his final moments, the resignation in his gaze. Thank you, I said, knowing I would never return. Chloe approached as Jax's parents moved to greet other mourners, a shared glance of understanding passing between us. I'm moving, she said without preamble, her voice flat. Boston. My cousin works at a marketing firm there. She found me a place to stay. When? Next week. I can't stay here, Ethan. Everything reminds me of, she glanced around, careful even here in the open air surrounded by strangers. I can't sleep. Can't focus, I need a fresh start, somewhere far away. I understood completely. The same thoughts had been circling in my mind, a constant hum of dread. "Where will you go?" she asked. "I don't know yet, somewhere far as possible." We stood in awkward, heavy silence, bound by a shared trauma we could never openly acknowledge, never truly process with anyone else. The government doctors had warned us about this, that we might find it difficult to maintain our friendships, given the circumstances, the burden of unspoken truth. "Call me when you get settled," I offered, the words feeling empty even as I said them. Chloe nodded, but we both knew she wouldn't. The doctors had been right about that too. Moving forward meant leaving everything associated with that night behind. Even each other Portland, Oregon, was as far from my former life as I could reasonably manage. I found an apartment downtown, within walking distance of everything I needed, so I wouldn't have to drive much. Being enclosed in cars brought back chilling memories of the tunnels, the pipes I'd crawled through to escape, the confined spaces of terror, the settlement money paid for therapy, though I could never tell my therapist the whole truth. I crafted a version that fit the cover story: survivor's guilt after a camping trip gone wrong, trauma from losing my boyfriend and friends in a natural disaster. Doctor Carlson nodded sympathetically, prescribing medications that sometimes helped me sleep without nightmares, but never truly erased the horror. 4 months after the incident, I was sitting in a quiet coffee shop, trying to focus on applying for yet another job. My concentration issues, my constant hypervigilance, made steady employment difficult. I'd been surviving on the settlement money, but knew I needed to establish some kind of normalcy, some semblance of a future. A man at the next table had a news website open on his laptop. I wouldn't have noticed, wouldn't have cared, except for the headline that caught my eye: "Third disappearance NEAR abandoned federal site raises questions." I felt suddenly, intensely anxious as I tried to casually read the article from my seat, my heart beginning to pound. The location was different, somewhere in Nevada, but the pattern was eerily, chillingly similar. The man scrolled down, revealing a quote from a local sheriff: "These old government sites attract urban explorers despite warnings to stay away. We're increasing patrols, but these areas are remote and difficult to monitor." I almost laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that caught in my throat. Warnings that didn't exist. Monitoring that served a chillingly different purpose. Were there more facilities like Arclight? More creatures being contained rather than destroyed? How many other groups, driven by curiosity and adventure, had ventured into the darkness, never to return? The questions swirled in my mind, a relentless, terrifying current, as I closed my laptop and left the coffee shop. On the sidewalk, I paused, looking up at the cloudy Portland sky. The settlement agreement had been explicit about the consequences of breaking silence. Legal prosecution, immediate termination of benefits, and other measures left ominously undefined, but implied a far worse fate. But I thought of Jax's parents, still waiting for closure that would never come. Of Liam and Finn, whose names had already faded from local news coverage of the tragic camping accident. I carried the burden of truth alone, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate me. Somewhere in Nevada, another family was beginning the same painful journey of uncertainty and loss. And somewhere in a government facility, people like Dr. Reeves were preparing another cover story, another settlement, another silencing. I picked up my phone, staring at the blank screen. One call to a journalist, one anonymous tip, one step toward the truth that could unravel everything. My finger hovered over the screen, trembling. As a black SUV with tinted windows drove slowly past the coffee shop, its presence almost imperceptible, I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It was probably nothing. Just a coincidence that triggered my paranoia, a symptom of my trauma, or maybe not. I put my phone away and continued walking down the street, the burden of silence growing heavier with each step, but the seed of defiance, of revelation, now firmly planted. What was the most chilling part of Ethan's story for you? Let me know in the comments below.